Hi, everyone. I know that I have a very little amount of time, so I'll try to rush through this. I have use of both of my hands, so I'm not going to be yelling. So as Charles just said, we work with a number of at-risk youth, and I'm the community engagement coordinator. And oftentimes it's like, why are you behaving like this? What is going on? And really, they're underneath the umbrella of all of these different things. They're underneath public policy, community, organizational structures, interpersonal structures. I mean, sometimes like a family will have 3 generations within the house, and they are being influenced by all those different generations and all the other cursory members of the family influencing their decisions on an individual level. But when we look at the history of Cincinnati, we see that there's been a number of different events, significant events, that have affected all of these different levels. So I'm going to go through a number of these right now, and I'm just going to read directly from the slide. The first one happened in 1829, so this is a while back, but it does affect now. The free African-American population quadrupled in 10 years here in Cincinnati, and then pro-slavery whites attacked black neighborhoods, forcing 50 to 70% of the city's black population to immigrate. So when there was a critical mass of African Americans, they were being pushed out because there was a conflict around, for a limited amount of resources. The next significant one was in 1841. This was the largest pre-Civil War race riot in American history, and it occurred near 6th Street and Broadway. Much of the black community's private property was destroyed. So once again, institutions are being built, resources are being brought into the community, but they're being raised from the outside. Then the next one, 1862. Due to black and white racial tension at the beginning of the Civil War, another riot broke out in the city's largest black neighborhood that escalated to the point that almost the entire black population of Cincinnati escaped to the country. Once again, being built up, being brought down. So if you think about the different areas in Cincinnati, the ones that now are currently probably low opportunity, have low resource investment, there's a reason for that, and it's historical. All right, so now we're going to jump ahead 100 years. After the assassination, in 1968, after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., rioting ensued that killed 2 people, caused over $3 million in property damage, and also caused hundreds of people to be arrested. So again, low opportunity, they're upset. The civil rights movement's happening. And then the leader, or one of the leaders of the civil rights movement, is now gone. And there's no other way to articulate this lack of opportunity, this lack of life chances. And I'm sorry if I'm talking a little fast. I'm originally from Los Angeles. And when I get going, I just got to go. So I'm going right now. And also, I only got like 10 minutes. All right, number 5. From 1995 to 2001, 15 African-American individuals were killed by police in Cincinnati. I believe this is the highest rate in the country during that time, and something really had to be done. So I'm jumping forward a little bit, but in 2001, the police shooting of Timothy Thomas precipitated 4 days of civil disorder. How many people here remember that? Yeah. So what was that climate like? Can someone give me? I love input too. All right. Yeah. Tell me what it was like. This pervasive tension and pervasive fear and pervasive sort of anger at this lack of life chances, this lack of opportunity, and the feeling that the structures that are around you are pushing down on you in not a positive way, right? So if we go back one slide and look at public policy, the way they understand the public policy is infringing upon the individual. So let me go back. Okay, and then 2015, this is very recent. I'm sure everyone here remembers this. Samuel DuBose is shot and killed by a University of Cincinnati police officer. So what is the difference between 2001 and 2015? Does anyone why is it that this pervasive rioting, this pervasive civil unrest didn't happen? Again, does anyone have an answer? The response by the police was different. But is that just immediate? Did things change that much from 2001 to 2015? Oh, hey, spoiler alert. Going ahead a little bit. All right. All right, so here we go. All right, so these images are from Ferguson. These images. You can see the response to the civil unrest. You can see the cry from the community members. What did they want? They wanted an indictment. And then at the bottom right, you can see Samuel DuBose and the police officer that shot him, and it says Cincinnati cop charged with murder. That's a huge difference. That is a huge difference because something happened there where the community's demands were met with a response in a way that they felt was appropriate, and they felt like their voices were heard, because a lot of this, it was that structures were pushing down on a negative way. But here, for some reason, something else happened. So I'm going to get to that right now. The difference, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to compare Ferguson and Cincinnati. First, the arrest rate in Ferguson is 3-1. And the arrest rate in over a dozen of the suburbs in Hamilton County are higher. You're actually more likely to be arrested as a black person in Cincinnati compared to your white counterparts than in Ferguson. So, I mean, while certainly there's differences, some of those differences aren't always positive. But the thing is that in Cincinnati, there was a mediation. There was a mediation that occurred after that 2001 shooting. And they brought in a third-party mediator who went around and he had institutional support. He had support from different different organizations around Cincinnati. He also had support from leaders in the black community. Number two is there was innovative leadership. People went outside and they talked to people. They got this guy from outside of Cincinnati to come in and mediate this because they knew something had to be done. They didn't want another 2001. They didn't want a Ferguson. And they were forward-thinking. 3, community engagement. I mean, everyone here works in some form or fashion with communities, right? I mean, one of the biggest things about what we do is that we go down into houses of different family members who maybe never have had an interaction that was positive with an authority figure or an arbiter of the state. And while we work at Ohio State University, so we're not technically we're not social workers or anything like that. We come into their household, we talk to them about their needs, and we actually just want to know them as individuals. So in doing this community engagement, there was dozens and dozens of surveys, like what is going on and what is it that we need to do? And then 4, they had media support. So like when you guys were talking earlier about there being this disconnect between the realities of crime in Cincinnati and what the media is projecting. They actually had a great media liaison, and they were able to frame, like we're talking about perspective, they were able to frame the perspective of what was happening in Cincinnati. And then, so all of this mediation fed into the quick response. It was immediate, right? Because I was up in Columbus when this happened, and everyone was like, oh my goodness, something is going to happen right now. And then there was like this quietness, and there was a surprise when nothing happened because there was such a quick response. And then 4 was the indictment. There was accountability. There wasn't this sort of, there was no sort of the blue shields, there was actual accountability for an action that was improper against a community member. And that was huge. So while certainly the arrest rate probably needs to be brought down a bit, all of these other reasons are the reasons that now we don't have a Ferguson in Cincinnati, and it's really a positive thing. It's a positive that there's all this community engagement, and there's a positive that this historical, I'm going to go back 2 slides, all this historical negativity was sort of not necessarily assuaged, but it's being brought back together a little bit. All right, does anyone have any questions about this? Now I'm going to jump, yes? Someone, a hand? Yeah, exactly. But if you look at what's happening in Ferguson now, is a lot different than what Cincinnati did. All right. However, irrespective of the way that these conflicts were resolved, how many of you are familiar with adverse childhood experiences? All right. Anyone want to give me a brief synopsis? Yes. That was better than I could do. That's why I love community engagement, because community members always have better answers than I do. All right, so these are different graphics that articulate adverse childhood experiences and what impact they have, what they are, the effect it has on brain chemistry and the development of the brain, and the types of behavior that could possibly arise out of average childhood experiences. But if we think about everything that Charles presented earlier, well, all these different, the inopportune areas, all these negative effects that poverty has in certain locations, be living in a certain place within Cincinnati they directly correlate to average childhood experiences. So when we look at all these metrics, you sort of don't necessarily see the individual, and you don't necessarily see how your environment, how what you're around is affecting your actual brain development and your likelihood to engage with all these things like smoking, alcoholism, drug use, heart disease, cancer, all these things that seem like they're in different domains, right? Like this is health. This doesn't have anything to do with the community, but it has everything to do with the community. It has everything to do with the type of experiences that people have because of the race that they are, and the history of the specific communities and the history of Cincinnati, really. All right. Any questions about that? Okay, cool. All right, and this is the average childhood experiences effects on development. And as you can see at the bottom is where those average childhood experiences that we can infer come from living in certain communities and being caught up in certain negative policy outcomes. And then at the top is early death. So really how we can understand these opportunity maps as we can understand them as mapping out early death in certain individuals. All right, any questions? I'm sorry, I flew through that. I was just going. I didn't even drink that much coffee. All right. All right. Yeah, is it 2:30?
So what you said is Cincinnati is doing well in the sense of what we've done since 2001 to now. Our rates are gone down. We have got innovative leadership and institutional support. True?
I wouldn't agree.
But we still are bad on all of the numbers that Charles put out there.
I don't know if you would call it bad, right? It would just be that you have certain statistics that appear because of the history of here. However, there are things that are being done to address it. And perhaps from our presentation, what we're doing is providing a different perspective on how to address it. Does that make sense? All right.
Yeah, I can follow up on that. I think on the next slide, actually. Let's see what we got next. Yeah, we'll tag team this thing. I appreciate it. Oh, that makes it so much better.
I had to get up here first.
Right, before he was like, you're on your own, which I understand. So, yes. Oh, perfect.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So I see we've closed the windows, got the mood set for the second half of the presentation. I love it. So what we're going to move into now is how do we engage with this? Because we threw a lot of stuff at you, right? We threw statistics and some stuff you may agree with, some stuff you don't. But what we're going to do now is really try to figure out what can we do now to engage with what we've seen up to this point. And so I'll start off by saying this. Relationships matter. Relationships matter, professionally, interpersonally, etc. How can we help to develop our relationships with the kids that we're working with? Oh, man. Dang it. It was going to be so good. It was like a lot of good text on there. I don't know how that happened. So this was basically President Obama. So who remembers when President Obama made the phrase, "You didn't build that"? Okay, so I would assume that there are conflicting ideas necessarily, or maybe some conflicting approaches on what that means. Can someone propose perhaps maybe what the essence of what he was saying is? Yes.
Just the myth of the self-made person.
Mm-hmm. So exactly right. And so I'll start off with this story.
Just the myth of the self-made person.
So you guys hear that? The myth of the self-made person? Okay, So my dad up in Columbus, my dad is an electrophysiologist. He's probably gonna make more money, than I'm gonna be able to dream of. And so, what did that provide me with? As I was growing up, two parents who appreciated, spending time with me, trips to everywhere. We wanted to go, Disney World. I went to Europe before I graduated high school. And so, looking at my life now, right? So I got a master's, I got a JD, working at this institute. A lot of great stuff happening. So part of the conversation could be, look at what I've done. Look at me. And I did work hard to get there, right? But I was primed to get there because of the opportunity structures that were present. Fast forward a little bit. So I was playing basketball about 3 weeks ago. And actually in the law school league, of all places to get injured in. So I was playing in the law school league, and I tore my bicep tendon. I was going for a rebound, much like I am now, and it didn't work out so well. And so I called a guy who's an orthopedist to see if I could get scheduled. They didn't take the OSU insurance anymore. Next thing I did was go to the emergency room. They saw me there. A day after that, I was scheduled to see one of the sports med docs at Ohio State. And then the following Monday, I was having surgery to repair my bicep. So, all the while, right? So what are the opportunities? What are the institutions to play? One, health insurance, right? I also had a brother and a sister, or a brother and a mother, who were able to help drive me around for a little bit while this is going on. A job, right? That I can take time off, that I can go get this handled. And so I'm juxtapose that against another story. There was a kid in the program actually that Josh and I we got a call from his grandmother probably like 2 or 3 in the morning, and she was saying, Monte has a terrible ear infection. He needs to go to Nationwide Children's Hospital right up the street. So Nationwide is probably about, 2 miles, 3 miles from where they live. And he'd had this ear infection for a week. She said, I don't have the money to get him to Nationwide Children's Hospital. So not the money for a bus fare, right? Not the money for a taxi, not the money for an Uber or a Lyft, right? And so thinking about the opportunities that this young man is going to have to sort of overcome, or the opportunities he's going to have to chase around his whole life, for me, right, it's easy, because this is what I've been primed to do. For this young man, difficult, because of the opportunities or the lack thereof that his mom is faced with. Another quick story. About maybe a year and a half ago in our program, we had a young man who jumped off the bus before we were leaving to go where we were going. And so he said, Mr. Charles, do you see that man right there? That's my dad. I got to go say something to him. And so I'm thinking, man, and so the place that his dad was at was a soup kitchen, basically, a free breakfast where they offer breakfast for folks that are in hard living circumstances. And so just there, I couldn't imagine getting off of a bus, and that's the interaction that I had with this is where I'm interacting with my dad. This is how, right? I get to see him every now and then. So then about 3 weeks later, I get a call from his grandma, and his grandma says, we can't take him our kids can't come to programming today because we have to go identify his dad or their father's body at the morgue in Grant Hospital in Columbus. So then fast forward maybe 10 months from there, our Christmas party, same young man says, Charles, my grandma's not bringing food home for me. She says she doesn't have money to spend, but she spends stuff on herself. There's no stove, no refrigerator, no microwave. He's like, she's letting the utilities get turned off. And so I reached in my pocket and gave him $60, right? But what does that do, right? It's going to help. It's a Band-Aid for a little bit, but hopefully the relationships that we're building along the way are going to help change the trajectory of this young man. I don't know if it's going to happen, right? Because he's 14 years old. It's crazy. So one of the ways that we propose looking at, the circumstances of the kids that we're dealing with is by employing the opportunity frame. Kids make mistakes, right? All of us make mistakes, but sometimes we have more leeway, we have more latitude, we have a bit of a softer fall, if the opportunity structures in our life have provided that for us. So what I want to talk about just quickly are these 3 approaches that we use in the program that we think, if leveraged properly, have the ability to really create some impact. And so the first is the collective impact model. So like Josh noted, none of us are social workers. They were like, Charles, do you want to run this program? And I said, yeah, not knowing really too much about it. And so what we saw, our staff is basically Josh, myself, another full-time person, and then we have about 13 13 students from PhDs, masters, and undergraduate students. And so what we understood initially, right from the gate, was that we can't do everything. We can't do all this ourselves, right? There's housing issues. There are legal issues. There are utility issues. There are clothing issues. Everything, right? Run the gamut. So one of the things that we started with was to reach out, right, to the agencies and the organizations in Columbus that were already doing this stuff really well. I'm going to get some water because I feel like I'm just going to keep smacking my lips. And so it is not going to get any better. Excuse me. So to date, we've partnered with Nationwide Children's Hospital to do healthcare screenings for the kids, mental health care screenings as well, right? We're with Legal Aid of Central Ohio to help with legal assistance for evictions. We're with a group called Directions for Youth, which does in-home targeted mental health care counseling. We can't do that ourselves. We don't have the capacity to do that. But there is a network of people in Columbus that are already doing this very well, and that's what we're leveraging. The second is the two-generational model. Or two-generational strategy, excuse me. So the two-generational strategy, so just to the point of the young man and his grandma, there are very important times of overlap in people's lives. And so if you look at the statistics, probably, the age of mothers, right, in Cincinnati, what you're going to see is that mothers are probably on average having kids at a young age, right? So between 17 and 24. That's a very critical time for the life of that mother. Also, 0 to 6, very critical time for the time of that child. And so what are the strategies that we can leverage that help to affect, what's happening with the mother or the father or the family? Because we know that the downstream effect of that is going to be a positive impact on the child, right? And so how do we fix, how do we fix infant mortality? We don't necessarily fix infant mortality by figuring out how do we stop babies from dying. We fix infant mortality by fixing the systems in the neighborhoods that are producing these crazy rates. And then lastly, we use a place-based approach. And so we're at Ohio State. Ohio State, in some circles, has a reputation of going into communities, of doing research, and then when the grant funding is over, then they leave, right? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to start to build networks and leverage networks within the communities that the kids are living in. Because if we're not there, it can't be that there's no longer any services, right? That there's no longer somebody that you can turn to, no longer somebody to help you out. And so, for instance, we have 5 or 6 different sites running all simultaneously on a given Saturday. All of them are located on the south side of Columbus because we want these kids to be able to build relationships with folks there and be able to work with them, in ways that we may not be able to. I stepped on my slide. You can go to the next one. Yeah, that was basically just going to say all of that stuff and what I just said. So what's an example of this already happening in Cincinnati? So we talked about the achievement gap, right? We talked about the graduation gap. And so what we have up here is a article from May 11, 2014. In Cincinnati, they're closing the achievement gap. How? I'm not sure which school this was, but let's see, one. So there is a dental clinic right next to the school. At Euler. Okay. I was like, is that a street? So it's at Euler, right? So are you all familiar with Euler? And so I'm sure that then you all have heard a lot about the work being done at Euler. And so there's a dental clinic there. Like Josh noted, healthcare, right? Also place-based approach. Locate the facility within the community. Another interesting quote, we really had to love them past all of their pain and disappointment and get them to trust us, right? So one of the things I said earlier, relationships matter. The kids, that are coming to you, we've had a kid in the program. We had to go pick him up from an abandoned house one Saturday because we asked his mom, where is he? Well, he might be here. We went to go get him, right? And he's 13. In the first TED Talk I did, I'm not going to go back to it. The first TED Talk I did, this young man found his brother's body on the porch of his house in Columbus. Had to end up moving to the east side because of gang activity. His mother, so he has an older sister, 2 younger brothers, and then a newborn, right, whose mom just had another baby. So she told him, you're the man of the house now at 13 years old. And so, so interacting with this young man, what do I say, right? I mean, you're given the responsibility of a man. I can't, treat you like a man, but in his mind, he is. And that's important to recognize because, coming from a very affluent background, coming from, Worthington, Ohio, having all these degrees, there's a level of reality that I'm not going to be able to touch with you because this is, your experience is so real, right? And so part of what I learned is that I got to take a step back. It doesn't, the middle class ethic that I brought to this situation, not applicable because there's real stuff happening here. And if we don't, if I didn't appreciate that, how many kids will we lose? It's not about, necessarily me meeting him where he's at. Or no, I got to meet him where he's at. He doesn't need to meet me where I'm at. Another, interesting point about this. So Cincinnati attributes its success to measures, big and small, that ensure its poorest students receive the basics in classroom and out, including tutoring, mentoring, food and healthcare. Tutoring, mentoring, food and healthcare. So obviously education, right, through tutoring. mentoring. Some kids, there was a kid one of the first days in the program, first day I met him, I said, how are you? How are your grades? And he said, I'm a bad kid. And he's 11 years old. What does that mean at 11? I'm a bad kid. The relationships, right, that this young man has been surrounded by have not produced in him or promoted in him the sense that I can achieve something, right? I can be something. And in many ways, where he lives that's reinforced by the opportunity that surrounds him, right? And so if what you see every single day is a lack of investment, what does that tell you, right, about your future opportunities, the investment that you can make? What can you do? And so this isn't an esoteric conversation, right? And I know all of us in this room know these same exact things. But sometimes what it takes, right, is us taking a step back and really embracing the perspective from a different lens, right, from more of a structural lens. Food, healthcare, right? There are people that in our program we struggle to figure out, where we want to get funding to help get you some food on a day-to-day basis. And so in this way, right, but what does all this lead to? What does this lead to? Boom, African-American graduation gap eliminated. And it's not necessarily, this specific school, but it's what's being done, right, around this. And so the question is what can we do today, right, to help our kids? How can we, there's an example of it being done right now. And the evidence is proven, through the decrease in the graduation rate. This can be done. What do we focus on? Looking at the areas that have low opportunity, right? We know what we need, in these areas. We need healthcare. We need housing. We need food. And we can't all do that together, right? We can't all be that thing. Can you take a couple slides back? But what can we do? We can create a collective impact model, where we start to leverage the resources of people that are already doing really good things. We can take a 2-generational strategy. We can say parents, a lot of what parents teach their kids is what the parents have been taught themselves, right? And so how can we work with parents to help produce better outcomes? And then lastly, a place-based approach, right? And so if our engagement ends, if we move, if we take a different job, et cetera, what are the institutions in the community already in place that we can begin to leverage and tie kids into or tie their parents into in ways that allow us to really leverage the total investment? So now we're going to go into the breakout discussion. Am I on time? Am I doing all right? All right, perfect. So with the breakout discussion, what we're going to do is basically, so using the 3 strategies and we're going to, instructions are following, but we're going to use the 3 strategies that I just talked about. So choose, collective impact, place-based, or 2-generational. And how can we use, one of those or all of those, with the kids that you have? We talked about opportunity barriers. Are kids having issues with education, with getting clean clothes, with abuse? What are the opportunity barriers? And then how can we build the infrastructure around what we've identified using some of these strategies to execute, on making the impact that we know is possible?